Hello and welcome to the Soundwave Podcast, music, technology, stories. For people who love the art and science of listening to and enjoying recorded sound. Here it's all about the art and the magic of sound reproduction and related human stories. We survey music, technology, and stories from the early beginnings of relatively low high fidelity to the heyday of the 70s high fidelity and the modern age of digital and streaming. I'm your host, Pat Shepard. Did you love to receive Radio Shack catalogs when you were younger? Radio Shack catalogs, are they gone forever? Is there a place you can go to relive the joy and fond memories of pouring through the Radio Shack catalogs, TV commercials, and corporate videos? Did Rod Serling, famous for Twilight Zone, ever record a Radio Shack TV commercial? And is there a place you can go to see that? And did Radio Shack create educational comic books, including one featuring Archie? Stay tuned for the answers to these questions and more. Today, I'm super happy to be able to feature my guest, Michael Dalessio, creator and curator of RadioShackCatalogs.com. So let's get started. So Radio Shack was a very important part of my upbringing. As I mentioned in the first podcast, I lived in a rural town where we had to drive 10 miles just to get to a local convenience store, a High's, not even a 7-Eleven. We didn't have any real hi-fi stores anywhere close for quite a while, but we did have a Radio Shack. My father purchased our family room's stereo component there, and we would periodically go to Radio Shack for parts and supplies for a stereo, things like phono cartridges, reel-to-reel tapes, and of course, the Radio Shack Battery Card Club. When the catalogs showed up in the mail, I would devour them, learning about hi-fi and what features defined their good, better, and best systems. My hi-fi adventure started with a Realistic, that was Radio Shack's audio equipment brand, a compact system. But as I got more into hi-fi, I put together my component stereo system and purchased the majority of my components and tapes there. The catalogs provided a great source of learning, and importantly, Radio Shack provided folks like me the only way to buy reasonably priced, good quality hi-fi equipment, sort of hi-fi for the masses. You'll remember in my previous podcast, the introductory one, I mentioned that I found my father's old reel-to-reel tapes of his folk concerts and performances, and though he passed away many years ago, those tapes allowed me to listen and feel like he was right there in the living room with me. How important those memories are. I quickly set about to digitize them because any analog media will, by definition, decay and degrade through the natural laws of entropy, eventually becoming unusable unless you take steps to preserve them. Listeners, take note. It's real important that you save your analog physical medium, tapes, photos, documents by digitizing them. If they don't cross the digital divide, they will eventually be gone forever. Hold that thought for a minute. We'll get right back to it. So, as a backdrop to this, as I was getting ready to launch the Soundwave podcast, I stumbled onto a great online resource that had all the Radio Shack catalogs and a ton of other great media, digitized and collected. It was www.radioshackcatalogs.com. Well, today's podcast is all about what Radio Shack meant to a lot of people and my guest's great website and the story behind collecting, preserving, and sharing the Radio Shack legacy, history, and catalogs. I'm proud to have Michael Dalessio on today's show. Michael, please introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, Pat, and thank you for having me on your webcast. I've been collecting Radio Shack catalogs since I was a kid, and they've greatly influenced my life and my upbringing, and I have so many fond memories of those old catalogs. And that's kind of was the impetus on creating the RadioShackCatalogs.com website.
Nice. Well, as we start this podcast, I want to personally thank you for doing that because as I as I was scrolling through and looking through the catalogs, I saw my old receiver, I saw my old phonograph, I'm like, I had that that equalizer. So thank you very much for doing that on behalf of everybody. And I realized that, the Radio Shack catalogs for me were all about hi-fi. What was it about the Radio Shack catalogs that kind of got you excited?
Just the electronics in general. There is so much so many products in those catalogs. And at the time, you know, my recollection is more of the 70s and 80s catalog. That's when I was a kid. And, you know, you would, as you had mentioned, you would open up those catalogs and you'd look at the products and, you know, they would have categories like good, better, and best. And you would compare, you know, it's like, oh, boy, I'd like that stereo. But for this much more, I could get the better one or the best one. And let's see all the features in this. And you know, there was Radio Shack had electronic kits, they had audio equipment, they had phones, they had CB radios, they had just so much, so many electronic gadgets and components that was not available at any other location. This is before the internet, primarily before the internet came out. And
absolutely. And were there kits that you particularly remember from the catalogs?
well, the absolute best Christmas gift I ever received was a 75-in-1 electronic kit, and it was made by Radio Shack. It was the Science Fair brand, and I got it. And I remember it was Christmas night, and I started reading. It came with a thick manual. I started reading it and started putting starting building projects, a little amplifiers and crystal radios. And they was this one project called the Big Ear, where you can hear whisper across the room. And I remember just reading. It went well into Christmas Day, and I'm still reading the book. And there were so many projects that I did from that kit, and that kind of sparked my interest in electronics and just building things and gadgets. So that kit was it for me. But you know, again, there was so many other products in those catalogs that were just fascinating.
And did building those kits parlay into your kind of professional career? Did it form the foundation of what you're doing now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I spoke with a lot of people who emailed me through my website, and I shouldn't say we all, but we share similar stories in that that electronics retail catalog just sparked the interest in electronics, and with so many people. With me personally, I work at a company that makes wiring systems for antique and classic cars from the 50s through the 80s. And without a doubt, a lot of what I learned about electricity and electronics came from that 75-in-1 electronic kit that, again, just started my interest. And that was available in the Radio Shack catalog. I eventually bought the 160-in-1 Radio Shack, the 161 kit, you know. But so yeah, I have heard from other people. One guy emailed me and said, you know, I really like your website. I got into computers with the TRS-80 computers. Back in the day, that was the first computer, first mass-produced personal computer from Radio Shack, and sold for $599. But the guy said, I bought that computer, I learned a lot about it, and now works at NASA. Another guy got into their computers and became a programmer, works at Google now. So, it's nice to know that I feel like I'm not the only one who was inspired by these catalogs. And again, it's just, I don't think Radio Shack ever realized the power that those simple little retail catalogs had on so many people's lives.
You summed it up perfectly. That's the whole, I think, message of today's podcast, is really just how important those were, and the memories and the influence that they had. So real quick for the listeners, if you can give them a thumbnail overview of the history of Radio Shack.
Yeah, sure. So their first catalog came out in 1939, but actually Radio Shack was founded in 1921 by two brothers, Theodore and Milton Deutschman. They provided amateur and ham radio equipment to the public. Then a lot of that was just leftover Army gear. And at the time, radio equipment was cutting edge. So to pursue their interests, the brothers opened up a store. And for people who don't know, Radio Shack was a room that housed a ship's radio's equipment. They called that the Radio Shack. So they all liked the name stuck. And so Radio Shack continued to do quite well. And eventually, like I said, in 1939, they put out their first catalog, and everyone can see that on my website. If they go there, they can flip through that catalog. And that was primarily a lot of that had high fidelity equipment. In 1947, they opened the nation's first audio showroom, providing amplifiers, speakers, turntables, phonograph cartridges, and the like for consumer purchase. And they had an extensive mail order business, and they eventually, around that time, they had opened 9 retail stores. In 1954, Radio Shack began selling their private brand, which was called Realist. But they were later sued by a camera company because the camera company had trademarked stereo realist camera. And so due to trademark infringements, Radio Shack changed the name of their brand from Realist to Realistic, which most people recognize nowadays, since that's what Radio Shack has been using since 1954. In the early 60s, Radio Shack expanded their mail order business, and now is the leading distributor of electronic parts and products for the do-it-yourselfers really around the world. But soon after that, their management started. They made a management mistake whereby they were extending credit for people who bought their equipment, their stereos, their amplifiers, whatever. They were extending credit, and the customers were not paying their loans or their credit, so that they got in trouble with the bank. And by the early 60s, Radio Shack was almost bankrupt. So here comes Charles Tandy. He had just returned from the Navy, and he was always intrigued by consumer electronics, and he was looking for something to do to pursue his dreams. So I guess the timing was right, and in 1963, Tandy bought Radio Shack for what was the equivalent, like $300,000, which was nothing, really. But the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, so he got a good deal. And Charles Tandy slowly started to phase out the non-electronic products from the Radio Shack line. And in 1975, Tandy Corporation eventually was exclusively an electronics company. In the mid-70s, people were calling Radio Shack the McDonald's of electronics, because not only in the number of stores they had, but in the quantity, quality, and sophistication of their electronics products. Again, this was all cutting edge stuff. What were some of those home run products? The CB radios, Citizen Band radios. The company, the timing was right. That was the way the truckers used to communicate, and eventually that was the way a lot of the people communicated with each other. This was before cell phones, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon. And Charles Tandy, actually, his CB handle was Mr. Lucky, and he did quite well with the CB radios. In 1977, Radio Shack introduced the first mass-produced personal computer, which was the TRS-80. That was a huge hit. It sold for $599.95, and at the time, there was other computers available, but the TRS-80 was a complete, fully wired and tested system that somebody could buy, plug in, and start using right away. Prior to that, it required a lot of knowledge about electronics. You'd have to solder things, you actually build your boards and you do things like that. But in addition, Radio Shack offered the first affordably priced stereo receiver that had digital technology. They offered the first mobile and portable cellular telephones that consumers could install themselves. They came out with the first high-performance satellite TV, again, that the do-it-yourselfer could set up, put a satellite dish on your garage, and there you go, you're all set. In the 90s, Radio Shack saw an explosion in personal communications with the family radio, the two-way radio. They actually started the FRS, or the Family Radio Service, two-way personal radio system. In 1999, they launched their website, Radio Shack Catalogs. I'm sorry, RadioShack.com. And in 2003, they unfortunately discontinued printing their retail catalog, which they had printed for 100 years or so. That I distinctly remember that day going into my local Radio Shack and saying, can I have your catalog? And they're like, no, we don't have any more. We're not distributing catalogs anymore.
Oh my goodness.
I said, I thought he was I thought he was joking. That's what I look forward to. You go into your Radio Shack when the catalog comes out, and he says, no, we're not doing catalogs anymore. He said, everything's on the website. And I was just devastated. I said, but that's what they did. They, in 2003, they discontinued their catalogs and they went pretty much exclusively to a web-based catalog system. And in by the mid 2000, Radio Shack was really starting on the decline. I have my personal reasons why I think that the company was starting to decline. I think a lot of it had to do with not only at the advent of the internet, but the fact that I don't think Radio Shack really realized the potential and the power of the internet, and they were really late in the game taking advantage of this. And a lot of it was due to also, you'd go into a Radio Shack in the mid 2000s, and they were just pushing their cell phones, and they also didn't have any hit products. Like the CB, the TRS-80 computer, the answering machine. They were one of the first people to come out with an answering machine, which everybody had to have and everybody bought it. So, eventually by 2015, Radio Shack had declared bankruptcy. And fortunately, though, about November 2020, a company called Retail E-commerce Ventures, which Rev for short, they acquired Radio Shack and are current owners of Radio Shack. They believe that their e-commerce expertise can help revive Radio Shack, and I wish them the best of luck. I certainly hope that they do well with that.
I can tell why you got into preserving the catalogs, and I think we both agreed when we had talked previously that preserving the catalogs, if you don't get them into digital format, eventually they'll be gone forever.
Right.
I think that was the impetus kind of to do that. Tell me a little bit about that and what your process. I think you and I talked about that it takes a lot of work, and people may not realize how much work and time it takes and expense to get those up there. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I have saved every one of my Radio Shack catalogs since I was a kid, and after a while, they just kind of sit on a shelf and do nothing. So years later, after I got married, had kids, and was doing some cleanup, and I saw my old catalogs and looked at them. The pages were starting to tear, and the paper was deteriorating, and I'm thinking, is it time to throw these out? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Those are all my memories in those catalogs. So I said, well, why don't I just scan them? I can scan them, and then I can look at them at my leisure and refer to them if I need to. So I bought a scanner, and I started scanning them. And in the process of doing so, I thought, well, if I enjoy these catalogs so much, maybe other people might. So I thought about, and again, I was new to the internet, never created a website, but I said, well, maybe I can create a website and put these catalogs out for people to see. So I did a little research, and I bought the domain name RadioShackCatalogs.com, and I started scanning and started to learn about website design and creating a website. And as you alluded to, the amount of time it takes to process each catalog is just astronomical. Everything I do myself, so I had to hand scanned each page, and initially when I started to scan them, the spine of the book would cause shadows and some of the pages would get distorted. So I said, you know what, I'd made the commitment to scan them, so I'm going to actually destroy my catalogs. I had to cut the spine off the catalogs to separate all the pages individually, but I figure that's, I want to get the best quality image. That's really the goal here. So I cut all my catalogs down to individual pages, scanned them front and back, and I was pretty proficient in Photoshop. So a lot of the pages, which were starting to deteriorate, might have pen marks from when I was a kid, writing my little notes in there. I wanted to clean all of that up. So all the pages I ran through Photoshop to clean them and optimize them as best I could. And started cataloging all the catalogs. And not only that, I also had a lot of old sale flyers, which, I mean, that's a whole story in itself. Me just looking so forward to getting those sale flyers as a kid with the free batteries in there, or free gifts, and look forward to going there, which are, as you had mentioned, the free battery of the month gift card to get your free batteries. So I also digitized a lot of my old sale catalogs as well. And so I started scanning them, putting them up on the website, started getting some good feedback from it. And then I started thinking, well, okay, I'm putting these catalogs up. Am I even allowed to do this legally? Is Radio Shack going to come back and say, hey, these catalogs are copyrighted, you can't do that? So I said, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write to the CEO of Radio Shack. At the time, this is 2008. It was Julian Day. He was the CEO of Radio Shack. I wrote him a certified letter, personal letter. I said, hey, I'm a Radio Shack fanatic. I love their catalogs. They've inspired me. I said, I want to create I created a website to pay honor to your catalogs in your company. Will you allow me to continue it? And I hadn't gotten a response from him, but coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, eventually I was contacted by this a lady named Angie Ferris. She was she worked at Radio Shack Corporation. She was actually the corporate records and information archivist. I didn't even know they had such a person. But she reached out to me and she says, I saw your website, huge fan. I said, let's see what we can do to jazz this site up and get you a bunch of material. So she was so nice and gracious and sent me all this material that that I could put on my site, and which
that's incredible.
Yeah,
that's so awesome that she did that. That's really
it was kind of a hit or miss. It's like either they could say take it down, how dare you do this, or they could back me and applaud me for my efforts, and that's what they did, and they've been great. So it just gives me the motivation to continue doing this.
Nice. Well, again, thank you for doing that. So a couple of quick questions. One is, I noticed when I was perusing the catalogs that 1945 was strangely absent. What people who look at that may say, what's going on there? Give the listeners the quick story about what's up with 1945.
Yeah. So again, I've been collecting catalogs forever. A lot of them I get on eBay, and for the most part, I have all of the catalogs from 1939 to the store ones, which were 2011. But I was missing a few years, and I did my research. I asked Radio Shack Corporation if they had ever produced any catalogs between 42 and 44, and then there was another 46 to 48. Nobody had any information. So my theory is that between 42 to 44, this was during the war. And a lot of, not only let's start with the paper itself. There was paper drives, because they need paper for the war effort. They needed copper. So all of the components that these manufacturers would have made to get sold through the Radio Shack catalogs, all of the copper was being used for the war effort. They needed so much copper, as a matter of fact, the pennies were made of steel, because the copper that would have gone towards making pennies went to the war effort. So my theory is that Radio Shack, because they could not sell products, all the manufacturers were making electronic parts, electronic components, communications equipment, all for the war effort. So if you have no products to sell, why have a catalog? So that was kind of my theory on why during that time Radio Shack didn't produce a catalog.
I'd probably agree with you, and maybe chime in that
Sure, yeah.
probably, the audience, the target audience was probably male, not exclusively, but probably largely, and probably a lot of those folks were out fighting the war, or in any case, anybody's attention was probably largely focused on that, and there was probably less, shall we say, playtime than there might have otherwise been. So the audience for this stuff was probably somewhat diminished as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. And that the people, their target market who would be buying these products from their catalogs, they're not at home, ready to buy a stereo receiver. They're out fighting the war. So
that's right. That's right. So where can people go to access your catalog and contribute to your efforts?
They can go to www.radioshackcatalogs.com. And when they go there, they'll see not only, all of the Radio Shack catalogs, a lot of the Radio Shack sale flyers that I'd mentioned. You'll see historical photos going back from Radio Shack, going back to the 1930s. There'll be photos of the interior and exterior of the old Radio Shack stores, and even current stores. You can see vintage TV commercials. I have thousands of Radio Shack advertisements from newspapers and magazines. The oldest one goes back to 1925. There's the Radio Shack comic books, which you had mentioned. They had educational comic books, which they had published and sent out to the schools to get the students and young kids interested in electronics and communication and computers.
And I thought that was super. I thought that was super cool. I didn't know that. I hadn't seen that. And when I looked at that, when I saw that on your website, I just thought, how cool is that? A company that's, obviously at the end of the day, they want to sell their products, but
right.
They're doing this to educate, and I just thought, companies don't really do that these days. And that was a unique and a unique period of time, and something that by teaching people the interest in electronics and stuff, they're helping to build their market. I get it, but they're also just educating, and I thought that was really cool.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a win-win for everybody. Not only for the students and to learn about electronics and learn about computers, and it was really well told through their comic books, and kids can relate. And we're talking kids, we're talking young, very young adults. They would read about electronics, and at the back of the book, it's, well, where do I buy that computer? Where do I buy those electronic parts? You go to Radio Shack, of course.
Oh, by the way, you can buy these things.
Exactly. Yeah, and they all the school would have to do is they had a separate department at Radio Shack that was in charge of these comic books, and the teacher or the principal just write or call them, and they would send them a case of comic books to distribute to their class. So it was fantastic. It was really great. Yeah. Very
cool. Very cool. But what's the future of your project? What do you see? What help do you need? Because I know you can ask people to. You've asked people to contribute if they can. What help do you need? And what's your future? What else do you have left to do? And what's going on with your project?
So my plan with the website is always to continuously add more content, to continuously build on it. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of information still to put in there, and I don't want the site to get stagnant. I want to always have something new and new, better, and best on the site. I have a lot of the old Intercom magazines, which was Radio Shack's employee magazine. They had a magazine for their employees to communicate, to get the word out about corporate events, corporate policies, just in general. And there's so much information and history and photographs in there that I'm working on putting those in. Those are hundreds of magazines, by the way. I want to put more of the old Radio Shack TV commercials. Again, some of my memories come from those old TV commercials, especially during Christmas time. When you hear the Radio Shack jingle and the toy pops up, or a radio pops up, or something, something electrical pops up. I have a lot of fond memories of those. So I hope to put more of those commercials up. I already have a lot of them from the 70s to the mid 2000s, but there's always more to put up. Just want to get more of the sale flyers. I personally enjoyed them. There's so many different ones out there. I'm always going to eBay looking for, trying to find deals on the old sale flyers. And all of this is coming out of my pocket with the exception of donations. So if anybody goes to RadioShackCatalogs.com, go all the way to the bottom, there'll be a link for donations. Anything you can help me with monetarily to help, keep the website alive and to keep this, I feel, an important part of history alive, would be greatly appreciated.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I
appreciate you having me on your podcast. And again, if anybody wants to learn more about Radio Shack or reminiscing about the old store, and hop on over to RadioShackCatalogs.com. Look forward to having you stop by.
Well, thanks, Michael, for your time. I know I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm confident our listeners will enjoy as well. So guys, go out and check www.radioshackcatalogs.com. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Michael.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Well, that wraps up today's podcast. Today we had a great discussion with Michael Dalessio about the history of Radio Shack and the story behind his efforts to collect, preserve, and share the memories contained in the pages of those catalogs. Visit my website, www.thesoundwaveshow.com, the companion to this podcast, with links to Michael's site and other information, and you can share comments, and I'd love to hear what you think of this interview and ideas for anything you'd like to hear about on this show. This show is also available on Apple Podcasts, so please subscribe and rate. And I have several more interviews coming up, including the next episode I'm titling Recording Audiobooks, the Inside Story from voice actress Olivia Belfi. All content, except where noted, is copyright Pat Shepard and thesoundwaveshow.com. The theme song is something I put together in GarageBand. Look forward to seeing you next time.